It's another interesting episode of Labor Lens where we bring to you updated information in the world of work and pay. I am Sharon Ijason. This week we will be discussing the inaugurated National Minimum Wage Committee recently set up by the federal government. But first, let's go for the news. We will be right back.
The Kaduna State government has disengaged 4,042 local government workers across the 23 local government areas in the state, citing redundancy as reason. The State Commissioner for Local Government and Chieftaincy Affairs, Alhaji Jafaru Sani, told journalists at a press conference in Kaduna recently. He said the exercise was part of the ongoing restructuring of the local government system for effective service delivery. 3,159 of the disengaged staff had put 10 years in service, while 893 had their jobs terminated.
The exercise is nothing other than corrective measures to position or to reposition the local governments to serve the people better. Only Bunungwari local government is healthy. All other local governments need one intervention or the other to remain afloat. So as far as government is concerned, government has really fulfilled that at least obligation.
The teaching and non-teaching staff of Michael Okpara University of Agriculture, Umudike, have staged a non-violent protest following the non-payment of their backlog of salaries and the trend of paying workers' salaries in percentage. Workers insist that they get 65% to 80% of their salaries, which is against the Nigerian labor laws. The various unions faulted the federal government's inability to look into the plight of the institution and opt a lasting solution to their needs.
It is on record that since 2015, October till now, we have not gotten our full salaries. All the deductions that have been made from our salaries are yet to be paid, running into several millions. And to worsen it, even the small thing that remains from our salaries, we are not getting. Percentage salary tomorrow, percentage salary today, percentage salary yesterday.
It's time to support my co-chairman in this struggle. Nothing is false about their statements. I'm not here to repeat what they have said. Yes. But one thing I assure the government, if they are not ready to come to Michael Okpara University of Agriculture to investigate and bring to book, then they will not be comfortable in this university. Yes.
The inauguration of the tripartite committee on the review of the national minimum wage is coming after a long delay. Members were nominated to represent the interests of the federal government, state governments, and the organized private sector in the committee's deliberations. The federal government had been blamed for stalling the process by not choosing a chairman for the committee, while it had, in its own defense, blamed the organized private sector for not nominating members to the committee. The former Minister of Housing, Urban Development, and former Head of Service of the Federation, Ms. Amal Peppel, is chair to the committee, and President Muhammadu Buhari is anxious to lay all matters concerning the national minimum wage to rest once and for all. He acknowledges that the last national minimum wage instrument has expired, and there is need to ensure a new fair and decent minimum wage.
We should aim to go above the basic social protection flow for all Nigerian workers based on the ability of each tier of government to pay. I say this because minimum wage is the minimum amount of compensation an employee must receive for putting in his or her labor, and as such should be anchored on social justice and equity.
Committee members pledged to bring their various positions to the table and consider all options before arriving at a consensus.
I have no doubt in my mind that everybody is coming to the table with broad mind, no hard position, because we should also look at the economy.
He said he wants a situation where the matter will be settled and the workers will be happy. And that is what we too will endeavor to do in the committee.
Labour on its part is insisting that it will base its bargaining on global indices to arrive at a realistic minimum wage.
You remembered when we signed the 18,000 minimum wage in 2010, it was almost equivalent to about $110. But today it's less than $46, and therefore when you look at the variables are really something that we need to consider.
In reality, the nation's economy, you will agree with me that today the minimum wage is nowhere. The global indices, Nigeria is the least paid workers as long as the global environment is concerned. But we think when we look at these indices, we'll be able to say, look, where is our inflationary trend? Where are we now today? What is the exchange rate in terms of economic environment? I think that's what we're going to look at.
And from all positions already taken, it is clear that the bargaining to arrive at a new minimum wage acceptable to all will be a robust one.
Adebimpe Onolapo is a teacher at a school in Ketu, Lagos. She has been working as a teacher for more than 5 years. She tells me her salary is 18,000 naira monthly. That's about $50 US. In my desire to understand how a person survives on less than $2 per day, we set up our camera and set out with Adebimpe from her house to the bus stop where she takes a bus to Ketu, Lagos. At this point, she pleaded anonymity, and so we agreed to keep her face out of the picture as much as possible. For Adebimpe, the routine of every typical workday involves deploying a marker on a board to impact lives and earn a living for herself. After the day's job, we visited her home in Ibafo. She narrates to us how she manages 18,000 naira with 2 children who have to be fed, clothed, and attend school.
I earn close to 18,000 in a month.
Okay, and is that sufficient for you?
It's not sufficient for me. I'm just managing it.
Okay, so generally, if I may ask, are you married and do you have children?
Yes, I'm married with 2 kids.
How is it been generally in terms of faring for them?
It's not easy for me. For the past 3 years now, I've been managing their school fees. I have to pay their school fees, but though my husband is supporting in that aspect, their food, they have to eat. Maybe in a month, I have to look for what they eat. Like, I spend close to 8,000 in a month for the household.
Okay, well, how much do you spend when it comes to the house rent on a daily basis? Do you pay on a monthly basis or on a yearly basis?
I paid monthly basis.
And how much do you pay?
Like, okay, 2,000 in a month.
Okay, so you pay 2,000 naira in
a month.
Okay, so that would be times 12. Do you pay that fully or your husband supports with that?
My husband do support, but sometimes he do support.
Okay, so you pay 2,000 naira on a monthly basis?
Yes.
Okay. So can you explain, has there been any time that probably you've had issues with the landlord because you're not meeting up with the rents?
Yes.
Can you tell me that story? With the high rate of inflation in the country, I asked Adebimpe how she is able to cope with house rent and electricity bills.
We use Jane, so sometimes we own Jane. We buy fuel to charge our phones, stuff like that. But the Jane we buy every day, and it's not enough We have to manage ourselves. Just for out of that 18,000 I'm collecting. It's not easy.
Adebimpe Onoluwapo, who is a teacher in a private school, just like any other worker in the country, will receive a similar amount as salary, is hopeful that the government will consider an upward review of the minimum wage and make life more meaningful for the Nigerian worker. Here is a graphical representation of the expense made by Adebimpe every day and what it comes to at the end of the month. The obvious question is, where does she get the balance? The likely answer could mean that every day for Adebimpe yields a miracle.
The present day reality, no, it is really not at all. You can't even, how are you going to do it? Even within a month, you would have expended that on just only on transportation. Even it depends on where you work. If somebody is, take Lagos for example, probably you are living in maybe Ikorodu, and you work in somewhere in Ireland. Under 2 weeks, you will have expended the 18,000 minimum. You are not talking about school fees for your kids. You're not even talking about feeding. You're not talking about other social amenities that you have to pay. In fact, if it was when the naira was a little bit valuable, I mean valuable, where you have about 190, 150 to $1, it could make sense. We are talking about something about 360 naira to $1. No. Even if it is increased to 50,000, I can't even take anybody home. At least for we're talking about an average family. An average family, you talk about the husband and wife, maybe about 3 children. It can never, and it is hard time that those that are responsible for the upward review of the minimum wage get cracking, because the more it stays, the more it delays, the more workers get frustrated.
Depending on the state where you are from, and that's why when people talk about restructuring, these are areas that we need to restructure in terms of the minimum wage. I don't see why Lagos State minimum wage should be like that of Kebbi State. Are you with me? So, depending on where you are from, the house rent in Lagos cannot. If you pay somebody in Lagos State 120,000 and you pay somebody in Kebbi State 120,000, comparatively, even the person in Kebbi is even earning much more than someone in Lagos. So, first and foremost, 18,000 is not enough. Considering current realities, 18,000 is not enough. However, when we want to restructure the issue of minimum wage, let each state pay according to its own capacity and according to prevailing market condition. And that will solve the problem. Other than expecting us to have a national minimum wage, there's no way it is done anywhere in the world. And I stand to be corrected on that. Doctors don't earn the same amount of money in United States of America. It varies depending on the state where you are working, and that comes into the narrative of restructuring which we are talking about. Let each state pay according to its capacity, but the minimum wage should be enough to put food on the table, clothes on the body, and shelter over the body, and take care of the basic needs of the people.
Interview segment this week, I will be speaking with a veteran journalist who has spent more than 30 years covering labor activities in Nigeria and across the world. I'm talking about Fumilayo Komolafe. She will be discussing with us our expectations of the 30-man committee set up by the federal government to review the national minimum wage. Join me. It's good to have you on the program.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, recently the federal government inaugurated the National Minimum Wage Committee. Do you think it's long overdue?
Yes, it is, considering the time that organized labor asked for a review of the national minimum wage. However, I think what the government has done this time around is to constitute a proper committee that will represent all interests. You know, it's a case of what's worth doing at all is worth doing well. They have been having discussions before now, but now that the presidency seems to have come in, it appears to be more serious and has wider representation. Even though personally I have reservations about the composition of the committee. My own view is that it should have been broader than what we have. The Governors Forum representation, as far as I'm concerned, means nothing, because the Governors Forum, I don't think is an institution recognized in law. Before now, what we used to have was the National Labour Advisory Council, with the Ministry of Labour changed to National Labour Advisory Committee. Now that one had representatives of the 21, I think then we had about 21 state governors. In other words, all state governments were represented. This one does not have all state governors or states represented. What you have is the Governors Forum, and I doubt whether the Governors Forum can really represent the interests of all the governors.
What other representation would you have expected from your years of experience covering labor?
Now, the way it is now, you have government as an employer there, you have NECA representing the private sector, and the unions are there. So it's fine, but I'm not comfortable with the idea of the Governors Forum. I think that the states should have been represented directly, so that you do not have what we have now. Some states are unable to pay 18,000, and now we are going for 50-something thousand.
The national minimum wage is meant to be reviewed 4 to 5 years on a regular basis. But with your experience as a journalist covering labor, would you say that this government pays the right attention in terms of reviewing the minimum wage as at when due?
See, no employer wants to dash you money. That's the truth, whether the law backs it or not. No employer wants to give money freely. So labor is doing what it should do. Remind them it's time to do it. Begin to put pressure until they come to the negotiating table. Although we had it once, in 1980, I think, President Ibrahim Babangida then, labor agitated, and then by military fiat, they gave 250 basic minimum wage, and labor accepted. No strike, nothing. No minimum wage has come with so much ease like that one.
So I would also...
And it was 100%.
Wow.
From 125 to 250.
Wow. Okay, the National Minimum Wage Committee has been inaugurated, but it's not included in our 2018 budget to have a new minimum wage. Would you say this government is actually sincere in ensuring that workers have a better pay when it comes to the minimum wage?
No, there can always be a supplementary budget. There can always be. And in any case, which budget are you talking about? Federal or state budgets? The federal government is for its employees, and they can send a supplementary budget. Ditto the states too. The states too can send supplementary budgets if they have to accommodate the newly negotiated minimum wage. So it's not about whether it's provided or not. It's the political will to pay. Once the political will to pay is there, of course there will be a way.
On the average, how long does it take to negotiate?
It depends what the issues are. If they are negotiating basic minimum wage, no allowances, it's easier. But if you are talking of consolidated, if you are talking of allowances, transport, rent, blah, 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 then it's going to take a longer time. And in any case, in any negotiation of minimum wage, ability to pay is crucial. But this is a good step, honestly.
So talking about ability to pay, with many state governments unable to pay workers' salaries, we have states owing as much as 22 months, as much as 17 months, as much as 8 months. In fact, the trend right now is fractional salaries. That is, you pay the state government, you don't pay local government, you don't pay teachers. Do you think reviewing the minimum wage is the right thing to do at this point?
It is. It is. And I still repeat, it is. Because it's about standard of living also. Look, let me tell you. If you don't pay people what they ought to pay, let me use a common statement of Adams Oshiomhole when he was NLC president. So if you don't pay them on the table what they should earn, then they'll take it under the table. A government that is fighting corruption cannot be seen not to pay living wage. If you don't pay living wage, you are encouraging corruption. So don't complain when people steal or they do what they should not do, you know, collect bribes, and I'm not saying it's right. But if they are pushed to do that, they'll do it because they have to, you know, live beyond the workplace. They have to meet their basic needs as human beings. So there's nothing wrong with asking for negotiation at this time. But whether ability to pay or no ability to pay, that's why they say the struggle continues. The struggle must continue, okay? And that's where the labor unions have a greater role to play in ensuring its implementation.
As an experienced labor editor, I would like you to tell me your experience when you look at Nigerian labor laws, comparing it with what it's acceptable in the global world or in the global climate. Would you say that it's high time that special effort is actually concentrated on Nigerian labor law so it will be reviewed? For an example, I have experienced so much clause when it comes to casualization of workers and how workers' rights can be protected. Do you think we have the best laws?
I think we do. You'll be surprised, but I think we do. Look, let me tell you, Nigeria has been in the ILO since 1960. And she ratified conventions on tripartism, collective bargaining, freedom of association. We have, in the core ILO conventions, Nigeria stands tall, okay? So our laws are fashioned along that line. But you see, even international conventions that are ratified, you have to go and domesticate it with your own law, which Nigeria has done perfectly well. Now, when you talk about casual labor is not an offense. It's not. Just by contract, they are not illegal. When I say it's not an offense, it's not illegal. However, there's a period within which you cannot hire a person on contract more than 6 months or 1 year, depending on the industry and what the law says. Okay? Nigeria has good laws, but in some areas, we need enforcement. And that's why, for years, under labor inspection, we have not been in the very good books of ILO.
Okay, if we've agreed that we have good laws, what do you think can be done in terms of inspection or probably implementing these laws?
You know, we have, there are courts for labor laws, you know. Yes, we have the Industrial Arbitration Panel, we have the National Industrial Courts, okay? But which, if there are disputes that you cannot resolve, at the point of mediation, conciliation, you go to court. However, labor does not encourage you're going to waste time in the courts. That's why you have reconciliation process, mediation process. Social dialogue is the key. Issues are better resolved on the table. Discussions. And let me warn that there's a common mistake that some labor leaders make. Only a union leader, a dishonest union leader, will go to the negotiation table and tell workers that everything we are taking, we are presenting, you know, as our position, is what we will come back with is a lie. A labor leader must prepare the minds of workers. For example, if you are asking for a basic minimum wage of 50,000, you know that give and take, here and there, we might end up with 30,000. You must prepare the minds of your workers for that, or your members. Because if you go and paint a picture that, oh, we're going for 50,000, well, nothing. That's when you begin to have wild strikes, strikes that don't make meaning, and then workers begin to say they have sold out, even in their own interest. The next thing you hear is that, they are thieves, they have sold out. There's no negotiation in which you get 100% of what you ask for. It hardly happens because the employer has interest too. And you must consider the employer's interest. The unions are not going to pay. It's the employer that will pay. So it's give and take here. Workers lose some, employers give away some. Then we meet at a point.
What are your expectations from this working committee? And how soon do you expect that they should come up with the results, owing to the fact that the standard of living of an average Nigerian has dropped?
I think it is made up of knowledgeable people who are skilled in negotiation, and I expect them to come out with something that will be of benefit to the average worker. At least that will lift up the standard of living. That's what I expect. But again, political will must be there. On the side of government to pay. On the side of employers, I don't see a lot of problem except for the recession. Business is not doing well. So they have to factor all of that, power and other things.
Thank you very much for joining us on the program.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's a wrap on today's edition of Labor Lens. Join us next week for a fresh edition of Labor Lens. I am Sharon Ijason. Thanks for watching, and remember, labor creates wealth.